The Empress returns, by Iowa Forever. Chapter 1.05, Negotiating. Matthias stared into the mug of recaf he had poured after they had sedated and secured Angelique. It had gone cold, motes of dust and fibers floating across the surface in small circles, but Matthias' interests had long passed warm recaf. The Emperor had returned. It was like the great sagas coming to life. The Emperor, the savior and ruler of mankind, descending from on high to smite the enemies of humanity. Many inquisitors had dreamed of such a day, when the Emperor would return, and now it was finally becoming a reality. Matthias should have been happy. Why wasn't he? My lord, Matthias looked up as Alexis approached, Nikolai more content to find a spot in the galley for himself. Drink this, it'll help more than the recaf. Kana tea, Matthias mused as the Valhallan passed the steaming bowl of liquid. No offense, Alexis, but I don't see how this is supposed to help. Drink it, perhaps something will become more apparent. Matthias gave Alexis an odd look. My grandmother always said Tana brought out your deeper thoughts and made you less confused. Wasn't your grandmother killed by Dark Eldar during the Necros Crusades? That was the other one. Matthias rolled his eyes and took the tea from Alexis, taking a sip before noticing that the usually bitter aftertaste was much stronger than he remembered. So, is it true that the Emperor's returned? Signs point towards it, Matthias said before taking another sip of tea. Inquisitor Marcos is checking with his contacts to make sure this wasn't an isolated incident, and Angelique won't stop babbling about her mares. Matthias shook his head. I should be happy that the Emperor has returned to take his rightful place in the galaxy, but it's only seemed to bring more stressors down on my head. You sure that it isn't just normal stress from risking the wrath of dozens of Xenos races? Alexis started before catching Matthias' glare. With all due respect, my lord. No, the Tau, orcs, hell even the Tyranids I can handle. Matthias looked away for a moment. This is something different. Alexis did not seem convinced, but Matthias was the Inquisitor here, he did not need his retinue to be too convinced, only obedient. By the throne, I'm starting to sound like my mentor. Matthias' thoughts were interrupted as Marcos entered the galley. I have checked with all my contacts in the Inquisition, the Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor started. They can confirm that this was not an isolated incident. And that has the definition of 10,000 independent reports from Inquisitors of all Ordos from across the galaxy, as of the last calculation. Add in off-duty Imperial fleets, regiments, and Astartes chapters, the number continues to rise. Marcos massaged his head for a moment before continuing. Many just acted like your witch, speaking prophecy before collapsing from exhaustion. Some were not so lucky, several astropaths of Battlefleet Solar suffered severe aneurysms, and the Psyker delivering the Emperor's tarot disintegrated once the message was finished. Matthias frowned. So it's true, then? No other being has the power to touch that many souls with such precision. Marcos smiled, an unnerving sight for those present. The Emperor has indeed returned. Matthias' breath caught for a moment before Marcos' smile dropped and he continued. The only problem is that no one knows where he is, much less this herald he spoke of. Galactic East, right? Alexis piped up, drawing both Inquisitors' attentions. That's what Lord Matthias said. You let your henchmen know of this? Marcos started, turning back to Matthias. This is delicate information, Matthias, who knows what kind of security breaches you may have made. I have the utmost faith in the loyalty of my men, Matthias countered. And we'll need them to know what we are searching for anyway. Angelique said that the herald is in the element's bed, which is what she calls Tau-occupied space. The last thing I need is for us to go blundering through and starting a greater conflict. And this is a problem? Marco's eyes narrowed. The savior of mankind has returned, and you are worried about some ignorant Xenos? Ignorant as they may be, the Tau would not take kindly to an Imperial warship roaming their territory in search of our leader. We could spark a war and then get stranded behind enemy territory, and then we'll lose both the Herald and any idea where the Emperor might return. You are an Inquisitor of the Imperium, Matthias. You are much more clever than that, are you not? Matthias paused for a moment, mulling over the task at hand. We'll need to move close to Tau space, to monitor their interstellar transmissions for anything that might be of use. Matthias started. Once we have a lead on where the Herald of the Emperor is, we can trick the Xenos and pass through without incident. Trick them? Marcos repeated, clearly unconvinced. Rogue traders of less than noble character often use Tau outposts to hide from patrols. I can disguise myself as one to secure the Herald, then bring him back here for transport to Terra. Marcos regarded Matthias for a moment. It's not a perfect plan, but it will be less likely to start a war with the Xenos. Your plan is not what we could have hoped for, Marcos sighed, but it will suffice. Carry on with the plan, I will continue to search for any more information that might be of use. Of course. Matthias started before Marcos spoke again. However, once the herald is in our custody, I will be the one to question him on the location of the Emperor. This is my ship. Matthias rose to his feet. I have given you plenty of leeway in this matter, Marcos, but I still answer to the Ordo Xenos and will not allow you to just close us out of this matter. The Ordo Hereticus is more adept at dealing with matters concerning the Emperor, Matthias, Marcos countered. Allow those who know what they are doing to handle this matter, then you will be released for your normal patrols. Matthias' right hand clenched again. Marcos was treading a dangerous line, yet he had the authority to maintain his safety for some time. And if the Emperor's herald was in Tau space, arguing with the Lord Inquisitor would only prove to be counterproductive. Of course, Lord Marcos, Matthias said finally. I will make sure we are in position to locate the herald. Marcos' eyes narrowed, but he said nothing before departing. Once he was sure the Lord Inquisitor was gone, Matthias slumped back into his chair and drained the Tana in one gulp, aftertaste be damned. Lord Marcos seems a bit aggressive, Alexa started. If you don't mind me saying, of course. He is just handling this in the way he knows best, Alexis, Matthias countered. I may not support some of his actions, but as they have not drifted towards an attack on the Ordos, I am obliged to comply with him for now. If you say so, my lord. Alexis replied, followed by a short grunt from Nikolai before the two Valhallans made to leave. With your permission, we'll keep an eye on the Lord Inquisitor until we have the herald in hand. Permission denied, Matthias said. The last thing I want is for Marcos to think we're traitors trying to impede his quest. He still defers to me now and then, so I have a chance to see what his plans are. No need for you two to get yourselves shot. If you say so. The brothers exchanged looks before departing. As they left, Matthias looked down at the empty bowl that had once contained his Tana, steepling his hands as he thought about what had transpired. The Emperor has returned and the Ordo Hereticus is acting more overbearing than usual. We'll have to tread lightly lest they decide to take full control of the situation and all that entails. Guella, a moment. Celestia looked up from her spot on the floor to the Tau that had poked its head into her room. For the last few days since her arrival, the aliens had been making small talk and offers to try and coax more information out of her and Twilight, but to no avail. Perhaps now they decided to go for a more traditional interrogation. Of course. Celestia replied before turning to Twilight. Continue practicing with your meditation. I will help you with more complex conjurings once I am finished. Of course, Princess, Twilight nodded. Though is there something simple, maybe? Something I can just work on as a start? This is a much more dangerous form of magic, Twilight, Celestia countered as she stood up. I would prefer if I stay nearby before you try anything. Right, Twilight gave a few more nods, blushing. But this is a whole new system of magic. All the theories, spells, abilities, you can't fault me if I'm a little excited. Of course not, Celestia chuckled. Now keep practicing. This should not take long. With that Celestia stepped outside, the Tau shutting the door behind her. Even outside her armor, she still towered over the little blue aliens. Their faces might not have shown it, but she could feel the fear radiating off them. You hold a good rapport with your student, the Tau started as it led Celestia down one of the base's halls. She is learning much, yes? Why such an interest in how I teach my students? Celestia asked. Perhaps there is something we can do to help, the alien offered. The data banks we have collected are vast and cover a variety of subjects. If you are willing to stay within the Empire, perhaps you could benefit from them. Celestia looked at the Tau. It would be easy to pop the alien's head with a thought, for suggesting that she would be so willing to abandon her people for some grain of knowledge. But a different thought came to mind, and instead Celestia threw back her head and laughed. Your offers are getting more desperate by the day, she said through her chuckles. And what do you know about my work? I follow your research and I would just plunge a few of your sept worlds into the warp before you realized what had gone wrong. The Tau worked his jaw for a moment, either baffled at Celestia's sudden mirth or trying to come up with some justification that the Tau's delving into the Imperium was not just the workings of blind men. Perhaps they weren't, but all were blind in the light of the Empress. They continued on, the Tau making no further offers as they approached a larger room on the eastern side of the base. It was wide and circular, like most rooms the Tau constructed, but it was roomy enough that Celestia did not feel too constrained. The first Tau left her in the room, mumbling something in their language as it disappeared from sight. Alone, Celestia reached out with her powers, scanning both the base and the planet for any signs of significance. The blank spots left by the Tau were noticeable, though there was a further shadow she was growing concerned about. The Tyranids might not have been on the planet in force, but they were growing in strength by the day. In a few weeks they could draw more focus from their hive fleet, and then they would be in such numbers that the Tau could not repulse them. And from what she could tell, there were still no signs of Imperial vessels searching for her. I thought I alerted enough psychers to my presence. I suppose I will have to be more direct. Guella? Celestia recalled her powers as more Tau entered the room. The leader was dressed in fine robes, similar to the one she wore now, and was flanked on either side by armed warriors. A diplomat, I see, she thought as the Tau drew up in front of her. I take it you have been treated well during your stay? As well as possible, given the circumstances. Celestia started. Though I would ask that you refrain from constantly questioning me, you are only delaying my work. Of course, the Tau replied, though Celestia could tell they did not seem convinced. Now, there are a few questions we would like to ask you concerning your mission and yourself. I will answer what questions I deem necessary. Celestia replied. Again, the Tau did not appear to like this, but they quickly moved on. What brought you to this world? The alien asked. A freak accident. I was experimenting with my student when we miscalculated and wound up here. That is quite the miscalculation. We may be close to the border of your Imperium, but we are not that close. You underestimate the powers that some of us humans deal with, Celestia countered. The Tau paused, a few of the guards murmuring to one another, before the leader spoke again. These experiment you were dealing with, the Tau said. What was it, exactly? If you must know, it is a prototype psychic shield to deter incursions by the demons of chaos. The beings that you humans believe are manifest from some other dimension? The Tau interjected. We have had some dealing with these creatures, they are of no real concern as of now. Celestia watched the Tau. The aliens were good at shielding their emotions, but not good enough. How many did you lose? She asked. There was a long pause before the Tau hung its head. Almost a whole planet, the alien replied. There was another pause before the Tau spoke again. You should be happy, no? It allowed your fellows a great victory. With chaos, there is no such thing as victory, Celestia countered. But we are getting sidetracked, no? Is there anything else you wish to ask me? Nothing that cannot be answered once you and your pupil are transferred to a more secured station. What? You are moving us? Celestia started, her voice low. This planet is under threat of the Tyranids, the Tau replied. And my superiors believe that you are too close to Imperial space for the Empire's good. Rest assured, you will be well taken care of on the next planet. Now Celestia was more than ready to destroy every alien she could find. So intent were they on keeping her here, they had gone past negotiation and went straight to force. There are more forces at play here than you realize, thought. I have said before that your empire has nothing to offer me, she started. I must return to the Imperium if I am to complete my research. The Tau Empire is willing to give you whatever resources you need, though, the Tau started. Would that be sufficient? You would have free rein to conduct your research in peace, provided that you share your findings with the Empire. I cannot accept your offer. Celestia replied. I must return to the Imperium. It is in the best interests of the greater good, the alien started, but Celestia cut it off. The greater good that your ethereals supply you with is nothing more than honey to hide from the truth, Celestia started, her eyes narrowing. It is a system by which those in power exploit and feast on the efforts of thousands who dare not question where their share is. While you and your fellows are fed to stem the great devourer, your precious ethereals sit in comfort and spout out nonsense so that more are thrown into the slaughter. They don't care about my research, or accepting me, all they want is the power that I might lend them, so that you fools are forced down and unable to realize that your minds have been wiped of basic virtues and ambitions. Your ethereals would create a sterile, autocratic system where none of you strive to achieve anything, and I will have no stake in your folly. The Tau looked at Celestia, stunned. The guards had ceased their mumbling, some of them shifting their weapons in their hands as they waited for order. I assure you that you are confused, the Tau started. Perhaps if you accepted our offer. Allow me to provide a counter-offer, Celestia said. You will contact the nearest rogue trader and ask them to come here. My student and I will board that ship and depart this world, and you will forget that I was ever here. I cannot authorize such actions. The Tau replied. Celestia made direct eye contact with the alien, her brow furrowed. Yes, you will. Under normal circumstances, Celestia was careful to restrict what power she showed, lest she scare off or traumatize her subjects. Now, though, she allowed a portion of her power to leak through, not enough to kill the Tau but enough to show him her strength and majesty. Only her sons and the most powerful psychers could look into her eyes under such conditions, and for the aliens before her it was like a patch of grass trying to stall an inferno. I will see that the necessary arrangements are made, the Tau squeaked, quickly ripping his vision away from Celestia's. You are free to go, Guella. Thank you, she replied before recalling her powers. The Tau made no effort to follow her as she exited and worked her way down the hall back to her quarters. As she walked, she allowed herself a small sigh. One of these days I need to speak with Twilight on these stressors, she mused. She did not have much longer to think until she reached her room, gently pushing the door aside before stepping in. Is everything all right? Twilight asked, eyebrows raised in worry. Everything is fine, Twilight, Celestia replied, giving her student a reassuring smile. I have good news, I was able to negotiate our transfer back to the Imperium. Really? Twilight's eyes widened. That's great news. Then we can tell everyone about the disaster and save the galaxy, right? More or less, Celestia sat down across from Twilight. But that is a problem for the future. For now, let's continue with your lessons. Twilight nodded before adjusting her seat so she could better listen to Celestia's teachings. Also, it might be advantageous to start thinking of an alias you can use in the Imperium. An alias? Twilight asked, excitement shifting to worry. Is there something wrong with my name? It doesn't follow many conventional human naming schemes, that's all. Celestia explained. It might draw attention you would rather avoid. Oh, there was a pause before Twilight's spirits lifted. Well, I'm sure whatever name you choose will work perfectly. I admire your confidence, Twilight. Celestia gave Twilight a smile of her own. Now, to your practice? Chapter 1.06, Collection. They had intercepted the communique 10 days after the Emperor's call had been sent. It was a small Tau outpost, a ways north of the Aquitus sector but not too far that the message would go dead any time soon. The Sanguinium martyrs had responded as quickly as possible before rushing into the warp, arriving only a few days after the message had been sent. The cruiser would remain outside of visual range of potential sentry ships while Matthias set out and recovered the Herald. And no sooner. The astropaths had reported a growing null in the void, one not caused by the Tau. The planet was heavily forested enough to hide the signs of Tyranid invasion, but Matthias knew that would change soon and the Imperium would not be so willing to assist the Tau this time. Lord Marcos was kind enough to lend his personal ship so Matthias and the Valhallans could head down to the Tau planet. They had not spoken much, instead focusing on their disguises and preparing for the Herald. Whoever this man was, Matthias would have to treat him with the utmost respect, as if he were the Emperor himself. Though avoiding eye contact might be a bit excessive. Lord Matthias, Alexis called from his comm station. We're being hailed. Adjust course so we don't provoke the Tau, Matthias replied. I'll take over negotiations. Alexis nodded and whispered something to Nikolai, the two making adjustments while Matthias moved towards the comm station. This is Cutter Iconoclast responded. Cutter Iconoclast, a heavily accented voice called. Please state your business and your cargo. This is Rogue Trader Mancuso, Matthias continued, pitching his voice a little lower to try and achieve the gruff, antagonistic tone he had come to expect of rogue traders. I'm responding to one of your transmissions saying that you needed a man to transport some whatever it is you call us. There were several murmurs beyond Matthias' hearing, though he could tell they were murmurs of relief. Your timing is impeccable, Guella, the Tau replied. We were beginning to worry that you would not arrive and we would be disadvantaged. Whatever, Matthias continued, a grin breaking out across his face. The Herald must have been giving the Tau a hard time. Good for him, the Imperium needed more aggressive actions like that. Just tell me where the cargo is and I'll take it off your hands, nice and simple. We are sending your navigator the coordinates. Sentries will be notified of your presence. Much appreciated. We'll get this done with no problem. With that Matthias clicked off, the Tau's voice replaced by a few chuckles from Alexis. Going for the Necromunda gangster route, I see? Alexis asked. What? It's never failed me before. Matthias countered. And it's not from Necromunda, I was trying for a Nicodemian accent, by the way. Never heard of it. Nicodemus was hit with an orc invasion back in M41. Part of my training as an acolyte involved hunting down a few that were causing problems with the manufactorums. Hang on, we're entering Tau airspace. Matthias angled the cutter downward, the lander shields flaring slightly as they passed through the atmosphere. Matthias never considered himself a great pilot, but he managed to level off the ship with little difficulty. Quietly he pulled the ship around several cloud banks, slowing their velocity and dropping altitude as they neared the Tau base. It was like any other Tau settlement, plenty of round corners, simple dome design, all laid out according to whatever plan their precious greater good called for. Off to the side a large section of land had been cleared as a landing pad, fighters and bombers parked neatly to one side, and already Matthias could see a small gathering of beings on the path closest to the base. Matthias angled the lander once more, pulling to a steady hove just in front of the entourage. The lander shook slightly as it made contact with the ground, panels and instruments rattling slightly before coming to a stop. Matthias placed the ship on standby before rising, pulling on the red coat and bandolier he would be using for a disguise. "Keep an eye on the Xenas," he said as he passed Alexis and Nikolai, the two Valhallans busy checking their hell guns and armor. "They might try a double cross if we're not careful." "Roger that," Alexis replied, flipping on the power clip for his hell gun. "We'll make sure the package is secured." "Good." Matthias turned towards Nikolai. "What about you? Any reservations?" "Tau will be in front of us," Nikolai said. "Makes it easier to keep an eye on them." Matthias nodded, striding towards the exit while Alexis and Nikolai formed up behind him. "Let's hope this goes smoothly." The ramp lowered with a hiss, Matthias taking a moment to adjust to the rush of light before stepping out onto the Tau world. The aliens were what he had come to expect from the Tau, short, deformed, blue-skinned creatures with odd armor and weapons. They seemed to shift more than what would have been expected, the soldiers eyeing one another as if they had been berated by a commanding officer. Matthias turned his attention to the humans in the Tau's midst, perhaps they could provide an answer to the aliens' skittishness. The first was a young woman, probably only in her early 20s. She was a little taller than the Tau, with a round face highlighted by a neat bob cut hanging down to her shoulders. She was not too stocky, but not as rail-thin as a high-born lady would carry herself, and her figure was shapely enough that Matthias guessed many a young man would have fawned over her on her homeworld. The other woman was something else entirely. She towered over the aliens surrounding her, and they were sure to keep their distance from her. Her body was covered in a gray shawl, the cloth bunched around her shoulders to reveal a more pointed face and long, brown hair. But it was the woman's eyes that drew Matthias' attention. Unlike the alien slates that were the Tau, and the poorly hidden optimism from the younger woman, hers were hard, weathered, like one of the greatest among the Adeptus Astartes. Matthias did his best to conceal a small shiver that ran down his spine, and he found himself focusing more on the younger one rather than make eye contact with the other. Whoever the tall woman was, she was dangerous. The Emperor chose his herald well. But Matthias knew better than to allow fear to enter his mind. "Nice welcome in committee," he started as he and the Valhallans came to a stop in front of the Tau. "So, who's needing a trip back to the Imperium?" "We wish no quarrel with you humans," the leader of the Tau replied. "Take your fellows and leave, please." Matthias nodded before turning his attention back to the humans. "Well, ladies," he said before gesturing towards the lander. "If you don't mind stepping this way, we'll be on our way." The young one paused for a moment, giving a glance to the older one before taking a tentative step forward. She was stopped when the elder placed a hand on her shoulder. "Before we proceed," she started, her voice like a regal bell, "I would like to know the names of our rescuers." "Name's Mancuso," Matthias responded. "The others are Alexis and Nikolai, can't be too careful roaming around here." "Who are you?" "I have many names," she replied. "You may call me Celeste for now. This is my student, Terra, and we wish for transport to the nearest Imperial outpost if it can be arranged." "Any specific planet?" "That is for me to decide." "Many names, concealed mission." "She's definitely the Herald." "Right. Now that we've had our little meet and greet, we'll get going." Celeste gave a short nod and strode forward, her student falling in place behind her. Terra gave Matthias a nervous glance before looking away, a small blush forming on her face. "Nervous one, isn't she?" Alexis asked as he pulled alongside Matthias. "A couple of thugs turn up as rescuers, wouldn't you be nervous?" Matthias shot back as he hurried to catch up with his passengers. "Bit cramped in here, but there should be enough space for you to sit comfortably, don't want anyone getting ruffled, do we?" "I suppose it will suffice," Celeste replied before turning back to Matthias. "Though I thought that the Inquisition would take more care in transporting important passengers." There was a long pause, Matthias and the Valhallans looking to one another with uncertainty. Inquisition?" Matthias chuckled. "Lady, we're not Inquisition, we're just rogue traders. Your clothing, weapons, and ship are all top rate, much too expensive for a group of your size unless you had outside funding, which does not appear to be the case as you lack any charters or sigils from a larger group," Celeste started. "You over-exaggerate your actions and mannerisms, hinting that you are either acting or you are overconfident to the point of stupidity, the former being more likely because you have the eyes and grooming of an intelligent man. Most rogue traders would not just drop into Tau-occupied space to pick up two humans out of the kindness of their hearts, and you made no further negotiations with the Tau to suggest that you had other business. Also, I have been to Nicodemus, and your accent is dreadful. Matthias stood in silence for several moments. Am I really that obvious? He asked. Celeste gave a short nod, and Matthias sighed. And I'd been practicing, just in case. You just need some work, that's all, Celeste relied. Though perhaps next time pick a disguise other than a rogue trader. Perhaps. Matthias massaged the back of his head before continuing. I suppose I should reintroduce myself. Matthias Velas, Ordo Xenos. Pleasure, Celeste replied with a nod. I suppose you are here in search for the Herald of the Emperor? Yes, Matthias said. And given the way you carry yourself, your attention to detail, and your familiarity with inquisitorial disguises, I'm guessing you are the Herald? There was a pause, Celeste looking from her student to Matthias. I am she. The cutter was much cruder than Twilight would have imagined. Celestia had told her that the Imperium was a reasonably advanced, incredibly powerful empire, but sitting within the Imperial ship felt like someone had placed her in the back of a delivery wagon. It was cold, dark, and the multitude of corners were lined with dirt. The whole thing rattled as they rose into the air, Twilight holding onto a nearby table as she waited for the shaking to stop. Celestia and the others did not seem to mind. The one watching them, Alexis, Twilight reminded herself, staring blankly ahead as they continued upwards. She supposed this was normal. Humans were a spacefaring race, they should be used to this sort of thing. The princess was equally understandable, and she still had to maintain her illusion and hide her armor. Soon, the shaking stopped. Twilight allowed herself to relax, releasing the tension in her arms as the rattling shifted to a low hum. We just broke atmosphere, Matthias said over the ship's comm system. It'll be a few more minutes until we arrive at the Sanguinium Martyrs. I'll be down there once Nikolai sets our course. I'm in space? Twilight asked herself. This whole trip so far had been unlike anything she had thought, but now she was in space. No pony save perhaps the princesses had been to space, and yet here she was. In space. Twilight let a small chuckle escape her lips. I'm in space, I can't believe that I'm in space. So, Terra was it? Twilight let out a small yelp as she turned her attention to Alexis. You seem excited. Something on your mind? And no, Twilight stammered. I've never been to space all that much. You'll get used to it, Alexis replied. Nikolai took a little more time, he vomited all over his kit the first time we left Valhalla. The commissar threatened to shoot him if he didn't get it cleaned before our first deployment, Alexis chuckled, at what Twilight had no idea. Why would someone laugh at the possibility of someone else's death? So, where are you from? Alexis asked. Twilight paused, casting a glance towards Celestia. She had remained silent, but Twilight could see a subtle shift in her eyes once Elisa started talking. It's a small tea world. Twilight started. Why, you probably never heard of it. Galaxy is a big place, so you're probably right on that account. Got a boyfriend? At this, Twilight's face flushed red. Her brain tried and failed to come up with a good answer, her jaw clenching and unclenching involuntarily. Still Celestia remained silent, though a small shift hinted that perhaps she was stifling a chuckle. You're supposed to be helping me, princess. Alexis, Matthias called from across the room. The man had changed out of the gaudy coat and bandoliers, instead dressing in clean green and silver robes and armor. Without pretenses, he stood straighter and yet still seemed relaxed, enough that Twilight found herself calming as he approached. What are you doing to our passengers? Asking them a few questions, Alexis countered. Might as well get to know them on our trip to Terra. I'm sure what you have in mind is not as productive as you think, Matthias replied. Thank you for keeping an eye on them, but I can take it from here. Go assist Nikolai in navigation. Yes, my lord. Alexis gave a quick nod, moving to leave before turning back to Twilight. So, can I get that answer later? Twilight blushed again, and Matthias gave Alexis a quick glare before the Valhallan disappeared. Once he was gone, Celestia spoke. You gather interesting figures under your command, she said as Matthias took a seat across from them. The Inquisition takes what it can get, those two happen to be good soldiers, and I needed their skills for several missions. A pause. But then you would already know these things, being the Emperor's herald and all, you two must have spoke on a variety of matters before you came out here. I have known the Emperor all my life, Celestia replied. He has had plenty of time to educate me in all manner of topics. Really? Matthias raised an eyebrow. Has he really been manifest in this reality for that long? Oh no, Celestia shook her head. But then he is the most powerful psyker to have ever lived. Communicating with one such as myself would have been no great task. Fair enough. Why were you in Tau space when the Emperor called? A teleportation accident. I'm not sure if you have noticed, but the warp has changed considerably in recent years. Matthias' nod was one of calm, but Twilight saw a few twitches that said otherwise. I'm not a psyker, but I know of the various mishaps and tremors in the warp. It was how we were able to find you, after all. Celestia raised an eyebrow at this, as if expecting him to explain. My team's psyker is a bit off. I see. Celestia replied. I suppose you would like to know where the Emperor is? It would be helpful, yes. There was a pause before Matthias leaned forward. Celeste, we need this information as soon as possible. The Imperium stands on a knife's edge, and the Emperor returning may be the thing that saves us all from destruction. If you can lead us to him now, we might stand a chance. I know, Celestia replied. But my orders were specific that I be brought to Terra. Only then will the Emperor fully reveal himself, when the time is right. Twilight's eyes darted between Celestia and Matthias. Finally, the Inquisitor gave a defeated sigh, hanging his head slightly. I can respect that, he said. And far be it for me to question the Emperor's will. I just wish that, maybe this once, he would be a little less mysterious in his ways. Inquisitor Matthias, Celestia said, giving the man a soft smile. A prophet once said that he who holds fast to his faith and tempers his patience will be rewarded in all that he does. The Emperor may not have returned to us yet, but once he does, I assure you that you and your men will see your patience rewarded. This did appear to raise Matthias' spirits, but the Inquisitor quickly regained control of himself. Why do these people have to be so reserved? Twilight thought. We'll see how right you are, won't we? He said finally before rising to his feet. I need to make sure that all the necessary preparations are made for our arrival. I'm sure Inquisitor Marcos will have more questions for you once we arrive. Matthias turned his attention to Twilight, who shrunk back slightly. If there is anything else you need, you should be able to find me. And with that Matthias departed, leaving Celestia and Twilight alone. Celestia returned to her silent vigil, closing her eyes for a few moments as if meditating, while Twilight shifted in her seat and thought over the conversation that had just been held. Matthias seemed conflicted, but he was good at hiding his emotions. Why, though? Was there something discouraging with the idea that their ruler would return? Or was it just reverence? Ponies did tend to get nervous around Princess Celestia, and from what she could tell these humans revered the Emperor as their god. Who wouldn't tremble in the presence of a god? But Twilight thought, her eyes drifting to where Celestia meditated. Is that really what she wants from her people? Chapter 1.07 Histories. Matthias had not been wrong. The Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor, Marcos, had much to ask Celestia once she had arrived aboard the Inquisitor's cruiser. She had barely enough time to place her armor in a secure spot, just so she did not rely too heavily on her powers to disguise herself, before she found herself escorted to one of the ship's interrogation chambers. At least they spared Twilight from their questions, she thought. The Inquisitor had started with some general questions, her name, homeworld, psychic prowess, all questions she could answer easily without divulging her true nature. This did not seem to please the Inquisitor, who had taken young Matthias aside for a private conversation. Neither of them realized that Celestia could easily eavesdrop on them. And you just accepted her demands so easily? The older one, Marcos, hissed. I didn't see why I shouldn't, Matthias countered. She asked for transport to Terra, then she would give up the location of the Emperor. You obviously don't see that this may be a trap, Marcos continued. She gives the pretenses of being cooperative, but as soon as she is on Terra, who knows what kind of disaster she could bring. The trip to Terra is several months, Lord Marcos. We'll have more than enough time to judge her trustworthiness. No one can be fully trusted, Matthias. This woman has done nothing to convince me that she is the Emperor's herald. Other than the fact that she is where the prophecy said she would be? The prophecy could have meant any multitude of things. We need to maintain calm before taking any major action. There was a pause. Celestia was half tempted to reach further, to touch the minds of her interrogators ever so slightly, but refrained from doing so as Marcos continued. We shall continue with the interrogation. Keep a closer eye on our guest. Celestia was half tempted to roll her eyes. Zealotry like that of the Lord Inquisitor had its places, but it was also adept at clouding the mind in the worst of situations. She straightened up as Lord Marcos and Matthias re-entered the chamber, Matthias taking a spot along the wall while Marcos sat down in front of Celestia. Now, I suppose you have taken some more time to think over what I have asked you? I haven't much else to do, Celestia replied. You are in the position of power, after all. Marco's remaining eye narrowed, but he remained silent for now. You still wish for me to give you information on the Emperor? Among other things. Marco's leaned back slightly. Your student, Terra, what is her connection to this? She is my student, Celestia replied. I have been mentoring her on a variety of topics since she was sanctioned. Then she is a psyker, as are you? Celestia nodded, and Marco's eyes narrowed again. You know that teaching psychic abilities beyond the knowledge of the administratum is punishable by death. When one stands in the Emperor's light, the darkness cannot take root. Celestia leaned back and let a smile spread across her lips. And you need not worry, the necessary arrangements were taken care of long ago. I see. Marco steepled his hands before continuing. What have you taught her? Mental shielding, primarily. With the warp acting as it has, one needs to make sure their mind is not assaulted. Celestia paused, before a small smirk crossed her face. Would you rather I say I taught her how to summon from the warp? Would that satisfy your distrust for me? I have no time for jokes, Marco snapped. I could have you executed for obstructing an Inquisitor's duties. But you won't dare lay a finger on me, because you are uncertain about the information I possess. Marco's was silent, allowing Celestia to continue. So, to your question? Where is the Emperor? That information is not for you to know, Inquisitor. This appeared to be the last thing Lord Marco's wished to hear. The safety of the Imperium is at stake, and you would let your pride stand in the way of the Emperor's return? I do not see it as my pride that is on trial here, sir. Celestia leaned forward, eyes narrowing. I follow my commands, just as you do. To do otherwise would be to defy the will of the Emperor. So is it pride to follow his commands, or pride to demand that one betray his trust? If you do serve the Emperor, Marco's hissed. I have humbly served the Imperium all my life. I am no man that would give in to pride so easily. The most prideful of men are those that claim they are so pure as to not be affected by it. Celestia rested her chin on her knuckles as she continued. I know full well the type of man you are, Lord Marcos. You have served the Imperium faithfully, no doubt, but the years have gone by and what have you received in return? A small thanks and then a command to go elsewhere? You are not one to judge me, which? Marcos growled, but Celestia could not be stopped. As the Emperor's chosen servant, that gives me plenty of room to judge. The years go by with little reward, and you begin searching. You don't turn to heresy, no, you're right that your faith is strong. But you keep searching for some way to endear yourself to the greatest of men, and as your actions grow more and more hollow you search for grander things to make a name for yourself, such as being the man to conduct the Emperor back to his throne. There was a long pause as Celestia leaned back in her chair. Am I right in discussing that your motives are not done solely for the better of the Imperium? Marco's glare would have cowed lesser men, but in the eyes of Celestia it was no more threatening than a foal trying to cow their parents. The Inquisitor made no move for a weapon, but the tension in his body would say otherwise. That tension was diffused when Inquisitor Matthias spoke. I think we've questioned you enough for now, Miss Celeste, he said, resting a hand on his pistol as if to send a warning to both. You may return to your quarters. Thank you, Celestia nodded in respect and rose. I trust we will have much more to talk about as we near Terra. With that she turned and left, the guards outside coming to attention as she passed by. Already she could hear the Inquisitors arguing, but decided to pay no mind to it. Though Matthias seems like a well-meaning man, she thought. Perhaps he is one to reach out to. She mulled on this as she wandered through the labyrinth of halls that comprised the cruiser. It was more cramped than she remembered Imperial ships were, but she would get used to that in due time. Fortunately, the interrogation chamber was not too isolated, and Celestia managed to find her way back to the rooms she and Twilight would be staying in. Twilight was lying down on her bed, her knees pulled up into her chest. She was not sleeping, but Celestia could tell that she was tired enough for that to become a possibility. Twilight? She asked. May I come in? Twilight raised her head and blinked a few times. Oh, Princess. I'm not doing anything. Celestia nodded, stepping inside and closing the door while Twilight continued. Shouldn't you call me Terra, so the others don't get suspicious? We're in private, aren't we? Celestia countered. Inquisitor Matthias has not reached the level of paranoia where he would wiretap every single room on a ship. There are people that do that? Twilight asked. I'm sure there are. Celestia sat down on the bed, Twilight scooting up to make room for her. I had already been entombed within the throne when the Inquisition came into its own. I used to wonder if I was still active, would I have been able to rein in their more zealous activities? Twilight said nothing, instead shuffling a bit to try and find a more comfortable spot. It wasn't always like this. Celestia leaned back slightly. There was a time once when humanity did not have to surrender to fear and paranoia. Really? Twilight sat up, eyes wide with wonder. Always eager to learn, aren't you? Yes. Celestia looked off into space, as if remembering a faded memory. Most people these days call it the dark age of technology, for so much was lost before the rise of the Imperium. It was sometime in the 19th millennium, if I recall correctly, humanity had perfected a primitive form of the warp drive, and it seemed like nothing was out of their reach. And for many years, they were right. Celestia gave a small sigh. Imagine the splendor of Canterlot, but taken across entire planets, entire star systems. At times it seemed like the city shined, as if everything was plated in silver. There was none of this cramped space and industrial layout. Celestia idly rapped a knuckle against the hull of the cruiser. Everything was designed with both practicality and aesthetic pleasure in mind. No one was left wanting. Even the poorest of the poor could live better than the richest of Equestria's nobles. It was a time of science, reason, understanding. She looked down at Twilight. You would have loved it. There were millions of theories and developments during the time. You could have studied for years and still have more to learn. Twilight's eyes sparkled briefly, but then her face fell. But what happened? Now it was time for Celestia's face to fall. Many things, much of it dealing with mankind's complacency. Celestia looked away. In their desire to focus on science and luxury, humanity had begun to regulate menial tasks to the men of iron, artificial intelligences that they had developed during their travels across the galaxy. The men of iron acted as day laborers, factory workers and soldiers. Then one day they rebelled, and humanity was brought to its knees by the very tools they had used to build. Celestia closed her eyes. I could have done something. I tried. My interference helped Terra prepare for the onslaught. But even with all my powers, I could not save humanity, especially from the cataclysm that followed. Something shattered the warp, Twilight. She looked back to her student. What, exactly, even I don't know. Some say it was the birth of a new god of chaos, others say it was fate, but with the warp in disarray humanity was cast like a stone into a raging sea. They were reduced to a petty remnant, and would have fallen if not for my efforts. She looked around. And see where that lead me. My arrogance led to betrayal, and now my dream of the Imperium is nothing more than a quaint fairy tale. Can't you fix it? Twilight asked. That's why we're here. We'll save them all and you can help them. It takes a little bit more effort to undo 10,000 years of belief, Celestia sighed. Believe me, I tried. A small shiver ran down her back, drawing her briefly to that damned peak once more. Her thoughts were rattled when Twilight gave a loud yawn. I guess I'm a bit more tired than I thought, the younger woman mumbled. I think I'll get some sleep. Of course, Celestia rose, straightening out her robe. Rest well, Twilight. Twilight gave a small nod, slipping out of her day clothes just as Celestia closed the door behind her. She stood outside her pupil's room for several minutes, her hand resting on the metal knob. The light shines above the mare, a voice whispered. Celestia turned and saw a young, frail-looking woman sitting against a nearby wall, head tilted to one side. It cannot provide too much shelter, for the mare must step out into the eyes of the raven, into the clutches of the darkness. You must be the psyker Matthias spoke of, Celestia said, crossing and kneeling before the woman. I can see what he meant with your prophecies. I say all that I see. The woman mumbled. The light sees, but what does she see? Celestia remained silent, peering at the woman as she rolled her head to one side. Curious, Celestia reached out and placed a hand upon the woman's cheek, allowing a small bit of her power to pass between them. You poor thing, she whispered. You have seen much for one so young, and who was there to help you? Mother lost her grip. Father his life. Tears began to well up in the young woman's eyes. I can hear the screams, the cries for help, but no one else can hear them. The others, they say they understand, but they don't. I am a light surrounded by darkness, and I see what is to come, but no one sees one light. Instinct kicked in as the woman burst into tears. Celestia cupped her hand around the girl's head and pulled her close, tears staining her shoulder. It's okay, child, it's okay, she whispered, stroking the young psycher's back to calm her. You may feel adrift, but you are not as lost as you think. The darkness may close in, but the light will chase away the dark. No, it won't, the girl mumbled through Celestia's shoulder. It never has. It has now, Celestia replied. I will not let you drift, my child. Your light is sheltered beneath me. The shelter will not last, the girl whispered. The darkness closes in, and lights will fade. Not if I can stop it, Celestia said. Not if I can stop it. Twilight's sleep had not been as restful as she had hoped. The bed she had been provided felt more like stone than anything else, but by the time she had gotten used to that her dreams had gone weird. Most had something to do with birds, ravens primarily, and made even less sense than her normal dreams. I suppose I can always talk with Princess Luna when we get back to Equestria, she mused as she pulled out new clothes for the day. Maybe she can teach me something about dream magic. Dressing was getting easier, though even Rarity would be miffed over the amount of straps humans put in their clothing. Once she was certain she was reasonably dressed, she stepped out into the hall and closed the door to her room behind her. The cruiser was much like the first human ship she had seen, only on a much grander scale. Stepping into one of the main halls felt less like stepping into a ship and more like stepping into a cathedral, like the one where Celestia had received the elements of harmony during the lunar heresy. The ceiling swept upward in great arches, like the wings of some great bird preparing to take flight. The lighting was a bit dim in places, but candle-like lights lined the arches and pillars, providing enough visibility for Twilight to see and navigate. The entire ship seemed to hum, not just from the mechanisms that drove the ship through the warp but from singing chants, hymns, praises to a god that Twilight was still trying to understand, all woven into the very texture of the vessel. Twilight had never been a religious pony, but the passion that these humans put into their praise intrigued her. Lost? Twilight let out a small yelp and spun in place, spotting Matthias stepping out from under one of the arches. With his dark hair and robes, he had been almost invisible, though now that Twilight saw him approaching she chided herself on not paying attention. And no, she stammered. Well, yes, actually. This ship is rather big. Be fortunate that it wasn't a Phalanx-class star fortress. I've heard the Imperial fists still find small tribes living in the bowels of that thing. Twilight's jaw tightened. There were ships so massive tribes could form in them? Don't worry, the Sanguinium Martyrs has been in my possession for some time. I've gotten quite used to its hulls. Oh good. Twilight nodded before Matthias continued. You look hungry. Come, let me show you where the mess hall is. He strode past Twilight towards one of the better lit hallways. It's not a Fenrisian victory feast, but it's still pretty good. Oh, thank you. Twilight fell in step next to the Inquisitor. Occasionally she could cast a glance towards the man, darting away before he noticed her. Or at least she hoped so. So tell me, Terra, he started. What planet did you say you were from? I didn't say, Twilight mumbled. It's far from here, though. I'm not sure if I'd be able to find it again. I understand. Matthias nodded. There are quite a few soldiers of the Imperium whose only ties to their homeworld is the banner they serve under. But it was a nice place to live, though? Oh yes, Twilight perked up. It was quiet, peaceful. I lived in this small farming town as a librarian, though so many odd things happened you'd think it was town problem solver instead. I guessed you were from an agri world, Matthias said. And I can understand you being a codicil of sorts, you definitely have the bookish look. But I would have thought that a small town would not need a person like that. That's ridiculous. Twilight half cried. Can you imagine what would happen if a town didn't have a librarian? Nothing would get done, no one would be able to record any information whatsoever, plenty of people would be petrified in perfect pandemonium. At this, Matthias laughed. Quite the alliterative response, no? He asked. At this, Twilight blushed and looked away. It happens when I get frustrated or flustered or panicked or. I understand completely. And I mean no disrespect. One of the first lessons I learned when I was taken into the Inquisition was that knowledge is the most powerful and dangerous weapons of all. With it you can create masterpieces to last ages, or destroy entire sectors. That's a bit pessimistic. My duty isn't exactly pleasant. They walked in silence for a moment before Twilight spoke. Matthias, where are you from? She asked. I don't know, honestly. Matthias shrugged. Some shrine world near Deliverance, I think. My parents were members of the priesthood, and I would have followed them had not the Ordo Xenos taken me into their fold as a child. A child? Why? It takes time to train a loyal Inquisitor. Matthias cast a glance over to Twilight. I guess it's a mite different from what you're used to, isn't it? Well yes. Foals usually aren't kidnapped to discover their special talents, she thought, but decided against saying such things. Well, I suppose we can't all live innocent lives as agri-world codicers, Matthias sighed. I suppose I envy you in that regard. The Inquisition does good work, but it is much more dangerous than what your life has been. It's rare to find innocence among the stars. Oh, there was a pause before Twilight spoke again. How long have you been an Inquisitor? 10 years, give or take. Including my training, it's closer to 26 years, he chuckled. I've been fighting or being trained to fight the enemies of the Imperium since before I could read. Some of it has been easy. Twilight noticed that his left hand twitched slightly. Some of it hasn't. I see. Twilight looked away. Is that why your hand twitches? There was a pause as Matthias regarded Twilight. She gave a small gasp and shied away. Sorry, I shouldn't pry. I just saw your hand twitches and thought it might have something to do with I don't know. Forget I asked, it was rude. There's no need to apologize, Matthias countered. Though your curiosity might lead you to a dangerous spot someday. However, if you really want to know, Matthias stopped walking for a moment and began to unlace the glove on his left hand. Twilight watched him in silence, one eyebrow raised in anticipation before Matthias finished. Then she gasped. His left arm, from the elbow down, was made entirely of metal. It still looked like a hand, albeit crude and not streamlined in any way, but with the glove on, Twilight had barely noticed. She worked her jaw for a moment, trying to come up with something to say, but for the longest time words failed her. What happened to your hand? She asked, grabbing Matthias' arm to inspect it more closely. It was not entirely my fault. He started. It was right before I became a full Inquisitor, so I was in my late teens or so. We were clearing a foundry on Nicodemus of orcs that had been tearing up the machinery to build tanks and weapons. I was doing my best to keep the plasma pistol I was using from overheating, but he shrugged. One orc bullet went wide and struck the thing. My arm was vaporized before I even realized what had happened. Twilight blinked. He probably wasn't that much older than she was, and yet in that short period he had seen more action and received more injuries than any pony she knew, even her brother. She paused, looking back down at Matthias' hand. I've never seen anything like this. It's far more advanced than anything I've seen before. She pulled the hand closer, much to Matthias' apparent surprise and discomfort. And it works just like a normal hand, right? I don't see a power source or external connections, so it's probably synced to your muscles, tendons, and nerves. The internal connections would probably give most surgeons a few headaches, but then your surgeons are probably much more skilled than the ones I know. Maintenance must be a pain too, especially if you're always fighting aliens and monsters. But then you've probably got some kind of armor or weaponry that can protect your arm better. Can I have my arm back now? Matthias asked. There was a long pause before Twilight let go, her cheeks flushing red once again. Sorry, she stammered. I like seeing new things. I noticed. Matthias slid his gloves back on before continuing. If you are interested, you can speak with Magos Errol. He knows more about cybernetics and technology than anyone else on this ship. That would be nice. Twilight gave Matthias a small smile. Thank you, Matthias. The pleasure is all mine, he said, returning her smile. Now then, about that meal? Yes, of course. The two continued on in silence, only casting the occasional glance at one another. Twilight was content with this. Talking was all well and good, but silence was not always that bad. At least now, she felt as though the world was not as dark and foreboding as it had been. Chapter 1.08, The Council of Three. The world had once been one of the Eldar's paradise worlds. Green fields and great forests had swept over the land, the skyline marred only by the occasional curving arch of the Xenos architecture. The Eldar had been careful to preserve the land, disturbing it as little as possible save for necessary portals and structures. That world had died centuries ago, and Magnus stood atop a hill overlooking a scorched, dried wasteland. The fallen Primarch made his way down the hill, loose sand slipping beneath his boots as he walked. A dry wind swept in from the east, howling over the barren wastes like a hunting banshee. Magnus paid it no mind. The terrors of the warp had long dulled his reactions to such petty things as wind. And there were more important matters to deal with. The structure he approached had once been a great amphitheater. Now the only song to be sung was that of the wind, the only performance the finishing moves of a game thrown into disarray. Magnus shored up his power as he stepped into the circle, keenly aware that he had come under watch from a new source. You've come alone, brother. A low voice hissed from behind Magnus. I need no guards to watch over me, Fulgrim, Magnus countered, staring straight ahead as the Primarch of the Emperor's children circled him. Magnus had always been a giant among his brothers, but Fulgrim could easily meet Magnus eye to eye as he slithered from the darkness. Do you mean to threaten me? What makes you so certain, brother? Fulgrim replied, a smirk breaking out across his face. Of course his face would be the one thing he left unchanged. I hold no sway over you, regretful as it is. But the warp is in flux, is it not? You know as well as I do the changes that occur within. What makes you think I would be so willing to follow you? At this, Fulgrim laughed. These are trying times, Magnus, he said, sliding behind Magnus once more. And tell me, since when has Tseonch ever showed true favor towards you, you poor, abused creature? And I suppose your position is any better? Magnus shot back. Fulgrim was about to respond when a second voice cut through. Quiet, both of you. Magnus and Fulgrim turned as a third Primarch stepped out of the shadows. He was shorter than the other two, dressed in dark red and black armor, and an otherworldly light surrounded his head as he walked. We have had our squabbles in the past, but I did not call you here to watch you bicker, amusing as it might be. Then why did you call us here, Lorgar? Magnus asked. And why just us two? I have my reasons, Lorgar replied, stopping a fair distance from Magnus and Fulgrim. I will speak with Perturabo and Mortarion separately. As for Angron, he will see reason in due time. Reason for what? I need not explain much, Fulgrim, Lorgar said. You know as well as I do the message that is rung through the warp. The game is broken, only destruction remains, Magnus said. I suppose your insight was able to succeed where my divination failed? You sell yourself too short, Magnus. Lorgar countered. I do not mean to boast, but I have discovered certain avenues that perhaps you have overlooked. Magnus raised an eyebrow. He was the most powerful human psyker, and he had missed something? What are you hiding, Lorgar? What have you seen, Lorgar? Many things, Magnus. I see the Imperium, flickering like a dying candle as the darkness closes in. I see the great devourer drawing ever closer, clawing at the dregs of reality. And I bring most interesting news, Lorgar smiled. The Emperor has returned, Magnus said nothing. Fulgrim, however, was not so constrained. Where is he? He hissed. Does he truly think he can hide from the truth? Where is he, so we can end his life once more? Temper, Fulgrim, temper, Lorgar chided. I know not where he is, but rest assured once our plans are ready, you may have the first strike against his precious Imperium. And your plans are? Magnus asked. The Emperor is in hiding, but he will soon reveal himself, Lorgar started. On our own, we stand little chance to oppose him, but as one, as we struck against him under Horus Banner, and with the might of chaos on our side? We may yet overcome him. And what of the others? Magnus asked. Not all of our brothers turned, and many are still alive. Let me deal with the specifics, Magnus, Lorgar said. For now, call out through the warp. Gather your legions to your worlds and prepare them for the crusade that is to come. When the time is right, and when the Emperor is at his weakest, we will strike and bring the glory of chaos to all who have been misled. Your rhetoric is as persistent as ever, Lorgar, Fulgrim said. But I will need more than words to convince me. What else do you have to offer? Oh, there is something planned, a demonstration of sorts, for you, Lorgar smirked. In a few months' time, you will see that my plan holds a powerful force behind it. All I ask is that you remain patient. My patience can only be stretched so far, Fulgrim growled. The Emperor has returned and you ask me to wait? This is not the time to wait. And that is why Guilliman nearly killed you all those years ago, Magnus countered. Though Fulgrim does have a valid point, your promises comprise much, but you have not given us anything more than assurances. My forces can be ready at a moment's notice, but I too will wait to see what your glorious plan is, Lorgar. Neither of you have any faith in your own brother, Lorgar scoffed. I'm wounded. But no matter, soon you will see the truth. No doubt. Magnus turned to leave. Farewell, brother. Magnus doubted the soundness of Lorgar's plan. The Primarch was a great speechmaker, but not always the best for grand strategy. The other Primarchs would be interesting to observe. Fulgrim and perhaps Angron would be willing to listen to Lorgar once his demonstration was finished, while Perturabo and Mortarion might be more hesitant. So many possible paths it would take time to sift through them all. Still unconvinced, Magnus? Fulgrim asked, sliding up alongside the Primarch. Not all of Lorgar's prophecies have borne substantial fruit. Magnus replied. And you? You were the one who asked for a sign. And I expect much from Lorgar. Fulgrim moved to cut off Magnus. But if the Emperor has returned, now is not the time for caution. He will strike quickly, and all that we have fought for will be undone. As if what we've created is worth defending. You, though, have traveled outside the warp to strike the Emperor's lapdogs. You were not subservient to Lorgar. Those were for my own personal grievances, Magnus countered. This is different. My power is considerable, but the Emperor's even more so. As Lorgar said, any of us striking alone will only bring disaster on us. If you want to rush into this, go ahead, perhaps you'll share more in common with Ferris. Magnus had barely finished when Fulgrim drew his swords, the demonic blades mere inches away from the Primarch's throat. "Do not speak of matters that do not concern you," Fulgrim growled. "On the contrary, they concern me a great deal." Magnus sidestepped Fulgrim's threat and continued on. "I tire of this conversation. Seek me out when you have more pressing matters to discuss." Fulgrim made no effort to stop Magnus, much to the Primarch's relief. Dealing with the others always had its share of delicacies, and Magnus knew better than to listen to all of them at face value. As he prepared to return to the warp, Magnus cast a glance through time and space. He searched on, looking about the dying light of the Imperium for the one light that mattered. That of the Emperor. "Our path draws ever closer, Emperor," he thought, sweeping the Immaterium once more. "Revealing yourself further will only expedite our encounter. Hide all you want, but we will face each other soon." As Magnus stepped into the warp, the darkness rose to meet him. Chapter 1.09 Dueling Interests. Sparring sessions and mock duels were not uncommon aboard the Sanguinium Martyrs. When not fighting the enemies of the Imperium, it was the only way Matthias and his retinue could stay sharp, and it did provide a brief bit of distraction from the stressors of the world around them. Matthias faced off against Nikolai, the Valhallan sliding into a defensive position. Unlike Alexis, who went for a more open stance, Nikolai shored himself up to better receive and deliver blows. Matthias circled Nikolai slowly, his eyes scanning his opponent in search of an opening. Sensing one, Matthias darted in, swinging his right arm around for an overhead strike. Nikolai had anticipated this, ducking under Matthias' attack before twisting around and lashing out with a quick elbow jab. Matthias rolled with the strike, using Nikolai's own momentum to shift his position and arrive behind the trooper. Nikolai sensed the danger and tried to escape, but before he could get away Matthias had grabbed him from behind and twisted again, the sudden shift breaking Nikolai's stance and sending the Valhallan tumbling to the ground. "And the Inquisitor wins," Alexis said from the sidelines, setting aside a variety of weapons Matthias had asked him to gather. "You're getting a bit faster, my lord." "That's what you say every time he wins," Nikolai mumbled as Matthias released him. Matthias merely rolled his eyes, letting out a short breath before walking over to Alexis and the weapons cache. "Thank you for the weapons," Matthias said, turning his attention fully to Alexis. "Now that you're finished with that, you can start combat training." Matthias fought back a small smile as he saw the Valhallan pale even more. Maybe I'll just observe, for training purposes and all," he stammered. "I am a delicate soldier, I can't take more breaking." "Always scared to fight me, aren't you?" Matthias said. "I wasn't challenging you. Go practice with your brother for a few minutes." Alexis gave a short nod, though it would be some time before his complexion would return. As Alexis removed his coat for better maneuverability, Matthias spotted Sister Bianca stepping into the room, Angelique following in the Hospitaler's shadow. "Lord Matthias, a word?" she asked once she had settled Angelique into a comfortable spot. Matthias nodded and crossed over to Bianca, sidestepping Alexis as he was laid out on the training room floor. "Is something the matter, sister?" he asked. "Perhaps." Bianca cast a quick glance towards Angelique before continuing. "I have had some reservations concerning our passengers, especially the one that calls herself Celeste." "You mean other than the fact that she's dodged all of our inquiries into who she is and where the Emperor is? Though I hold my utmost reverence for him, I cannot understand why he would choose someone so unsettling." Bianca shivered, a rare sight from the usually pleasant sister. "I have not spoken to her much during our trip, but even standing in the same room as her makes me feel like a child." "A child?" "Specifically one being scolded by her sister superior." Bianca shook her head before continuing. "I do not mean any disrespect towards the woman, but she carries herself with much more regality than a simple herald should. I will be the first to admit there is something about Celeste that I have not seen in many others." Matthias looked over his shoulder to the two sparring Valhallans. "Alexis and Nikolai didn't tell me about anything out of the ordinary, though, and I doubt Lord Marcos would be in any mood to discuss Celeste properly. I'd ask more of her," but he shrugged, Bianca nodding in understanding. "The light is good, though," Angelique mumbled. "The screams of the lost seem so far away now." "That's another thing I have noticed." Bianca looked towards Angelique. "Angelique has been much more lucid than usual." "That doesn't tell me much. I've caught her sneaking out of her quarters a few times since we departed Tau space." Bianca looked back to Matthias. "It's more of her usual wanderings, but several times she has looped towards the guest quarters. Where Celeste and Terra are staying." Matthias finished. "They both claim to be psychers, skilled ones at that. Perhaps there is some kind of link that they share? It's not unheard of, but I don't think that is the case." The fact remains that when Angelique returns, she is much more coherent than when she remains unattended. It might be that Celeste affects Angelique differently than she affects you and I. I would ask her why, but I believe it may have to do with the Emperor's influence on her life. Really? Matthias asked, one eyebrow raised. The Emperor's presence affects us all in different ways, Matthias. Bianca gave a small smile. His light may be enough for Angelique to focus on and clear her mind. Matthias was not one to doubt Bianca's reasoning. He was strong in his faith, sure enough, but the sisters had a closer connection the Emperor that not many truly understood. Still, Bianca's information would have to be attended to closely. Carefully as well, lest the herald assume that Matthias and the others were conspiring with one another. Do you think you can keep a closer watch on Angelique, he said. Perhaps find out what she's speaking to the herald for? I could try, but understand that I have no desire to intrude too deeply into the life of the Emperor's herald. That would be improper of me. I understand, but any information on Celeste or Terra that you can glean before our arrival would be greatly appreciated. Bianca gave a short nod, though Matthias could tell she was still uncomfortable with the idea. As the Hospitaller turned her attention towards Angelique, who had started picking at something on the floor, Matthias' attention was drawn back towards the door, spotting movement just at the edge of his field of view as Terra stepped into the room. Glad to see she's getting used to the ship. Oh, am I interrupting anything? She asked, taking a small step back. I was just exploring a bit and some of the crew told me to head here, because that's where you were. We're just holding sparring practice, nothing more. Matthias replied, his words punctuated by the sound of Nikolai tossing Alexis against the ground. Though some of us probably need more practice than others. Oh. Terra nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. May I watch? I don't see why you shouldn't. Matthias paused. Who knows, what you learn here might end up saving your life someday. Maybe I'm not much of a fighter or anything, I probably wouldn't know much about what you're doing. Matthias quirked an eyebrow at this. As a codicillar she might not have had much reason to fear for her life, but that would have been before she was taken as a student of the Emperor's herald. Well, it's never too late to learn. Terra blinked a few times as Matthias crossed over to the weapons Alexis had brought in. He found one, an older power sword that had gotten shuffled into the mix, and took a moment to gauge its weight before turning back to Terra. Here, this should be good for a woman of your size. I'm not sure if this is a good idea, Terra stammered. I've never handled a sword before in my life. As long as you don't turn on the power field, we should be fine. Terra hesitated before gingerly taking the sword from Matthias, raising and lowering it a few times to adjust to its weight. Matthias turned away to retrieve a sword of his own while Angelique mumbled something about mares and snakes. Now, the first thing you want to work on is your grip, Matthias said as he took a position across from Terra. If your grip is too loose, you'll drop the sword the first time someone strikes at you. Too firm, and you'll lose a bit of dexterity and risk having all the energy from a strike get shoved into your arm. Like this? Terra held up her hand to show Matthias. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable. Matthias replied. Terra adjusted her grip again before Matthias continued. Next, we're going to deal with a couple of simple parries. Once you've mastered those, you should be off to a good start. No fancy moves or anything like that? Terra asked, Matthias unsure if she was joking or not. Those will come later. Always learn how to block before you learn how to kill something, it will probably save your life. Terra gave a quick series of nods, holding her sword up as Matthias readied his blade. Now, let's say for a moment that your opponent comes in for a short stab, like this. Matthias readied himself and lunged forward, keeping his left hand free while the sword darted forward. To his surprise, Terra did not shrink away, as most new recruits did when faced with the possibility of being stabbed, instead bringing her own sword down quickly to swat Matthias' weapon away. There was a pause as her eyes darted from the sword to Matthias. Was that good? She asked. Well, you're taking to it well, at least, Matthias replied. But you can't just stop your motions like that. If you do, Matthias slid his sword out from under Terra's and swept out, the sword stopping inches away from her neck. Then your opponent has a chance to get around your defenses, and you will have no chance to stop him. Oh, Terra stammered, taking a few steps away. Can we try that again? Of course. Matthias drew back to his original stance. Let's try that lunge again, only this time try to be a bit smoother with your actions. Terra nodded, bringing her sword up as she faced off against Matthias. There was a pause before Matthias darted forward again, Terra once more bringing her sword down on top of Matthias. Only this time, as he drew up to go for her neck, she brought the sword up and managed to slow Matthias' strike, even if only a little. Much better, Matthias nodded. I have to say, you're a quick study. Thanks. Terra beamed. I've always been good with information. I guess that doesn't always apply to books, now does it? Guess not. Matthias found himself grinning. The girl was incredibly choppy with her movements, but her attitude carried more towards endearing than dangerous. Naive optimism radiated from her, and such optimism could be refined for greater purpose. A little more training, and perhaps she would be a great fighter someday. He just had to make sure that she survived to see that day. Even if she was not the most inconspicuous of people, Celestia was more than able to stick to the shadows outside of Twilight or Matthias' view. She stood in silence, watching every strike and parry that the two practiced. Twilight would need much more practice, but she was a good student, she would progress quickly, and hopefully be ready to face the challenges of the Imperium. I suppose I can help her along, she thought. Subtly, for now, once I reveal myself, her training can become more direct. Celestia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of boots against metal. She did not need to shift her attention as Lord Inquisitor Marcos approached, the man pausing only for a moment as he spotted her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice still as hard as ever. "It is no crime in watching over one's student," Celestia replied, keeping her gaze fixed on Twilight. "And am I not allowed some modicum of freedom? A training room is hardly a restricted area. And yet you lurk in the shadows." Marcos countered. "Not all of us need to make our presence known with bluster." Marcos' frown grew deeper as Celestia continued. "But I presume you are not here merely to discuss my observation." "We will be arriving within Segmentum Solar in a few days," Marcos replied. "By the time the month is out, we'll be in the Sol system, and from there the approach to Terra remains. As a sworn servant of the Emperor of Mankind, it is my duty to make sure that potential threats are destroyed before they even get so close to the seat of humanity." "You consider me a threat now?" Celestia asked, her voice devoid of surprise. "Paranoia can lead one to many places, Inquisitor, more often than not straight into the gates of hell." "Are you threatening me, witch?" "If I meant to threaten you, there would have been no need to question me." Celestia turned her attention back to Twilight and Matthias. They had stopped their sparring for now, the young Inquisitor now inspecting Twilight's grip on her sword. "If you are so certain that I am a threat, why keep questioning me? Why not put a last bolt between my eyes and end it right now?" "Because the young Inquisitor is still certain that you are the Emperor's herald." Marco's gaze drifted towards the Inquisitor. "And he has the confidence of the Ordos. Had he truly considered his mission, he would have scoured that region of space until a more forthcoming candidate was found, but instead he chose you. Pathetic." "I do not see optimism to be pathetic, Inquisitor," Celestia replied. "Dangerous when not tempered with reason, perhaps, but not pathetic. Was it not childlike faith in the strength of humanity that led us to conquer the stars? Was it not the belief in the indomitable right of man that inspired thousands to reject the allures of chaos? Was it not faith and courage that let Guardsman Pius stand before the Warmaster of Chaos and save the Emperor's life? You select only a few outliers to make your point impossible to argue against. It would not be the first time, Celestia thought. If you were truly operating for the Imperium's benefit, you would tell us of the Emperor's location now so we do not have to waste more time searching for him. As I said, my information is not meant for you." Celestia looked away from Twilight and Matthias to focus on Marcos. "I was ordered to speak only to the High Lords of Terra. Once that task is complete, the Emperor will be revealed. And who is to say that you won't just rip open a warp portal and tear the heart out of the Imperium in one stroke?" Celestia stifled a scoff. "Perhaps I was wrong about you, Marcos," she said, her voice dropping. "Perhaps it isn't that your faith is strong, perhaps it is that you have reached a point where the only person who is not a traitor is yourself." If Marcos had been trying to conceal his rage before, he was utterly failing to do so now. "I can have you executed for questioning my loyalty," he growled. "And challenge the Emperor's will?" Celestia replied, folding her arms across her chest. "Some would consider that heresy of the highest order." This did not seem to break Marco's ire, and Celestia could feel a bad taste forming at the back of her throat. Was it really so easy to give in to the temptations of divine exploitation like that? "Then again, you have been allowing your subjects to worship you for 1,000 years, a small voice whispered from the back of her mind. "I have tried my best to remain civil," Marcos started, his voice low. "I have made concessions with the young Inquisitor, with your student, and with you. But I am still an Inquisitor of the Imperium of Mankind, and I cannot tolerate any further insults, challenges, and avoidance that you seem to enjoy so much. You may have tricked the Ordo Xenos into trusting you, but as soon as your plotting falls apart I will be the first to see you brought to ruin." Do not let your arrogance cloud your judgment. Celestia turned back to the sparring match before her. Great men have fallen to ruin in the belief that their path was infallible, and those that survived their fall were treated as the lowest of the low. The Inquisitor gave no further response beyond another glare, marching past Celestia and out of sight. I would know the dangers of arrogance, Celestia thought, watching in silence as Matthias helped Twilight up after she had tripped. I was the greatest of man, after all. End of chapter 1.09, Dueling Interests.